Hi, and welcome to another week in Com 130. This week we are talking all about color. Let's start by talking about the color wheel. You can read very in depth about this in your reading, but I do want to highlight some main points. First off, we have our primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. These are called primary colors because they cannot be created by mixing other colors together. These colors are quite bright, and as a result, you'll often see primary color schemes with red, yellow, and blue aimed at children. Next, we have secondary colors. If you mix each of the primary colors with an equal amount of the one next to it, for example, if you mix red and yellow, you'll get a secondary color. In that example, it would be orange. If you mix yellow and blue, of course, you get green, and blue and red, you get purple. Pretty simple so far. You've probably heard about this before. Next up, we have our tertiary colors. If you mix a secondary color with a primary color that's next to it, you will get the tertiary colors. These colors typically have hyphenated names, such as blue-green or red purple, but sometimes they'll have nicknames like aqua or violet. So now we have our filled in color wheel with the basic 12 colors. And with this color wheel, we can create combinations of colors that are pretty much guaranteed to work together. Those are called color schemes. And the first one that we're going to talk about is our complementary color schemes. Colors that are directly across from each other or are exact opposites are complements. Because they're so opposite, they often work best when one is the main color and the other is an accent. These color schemes have a lot of color contrast. However, they also can be a bit overwhelming if you don't utilize them carefully. Because these complementary color schemes are so contrasting and strong, they're really popular with sports teams. Next up, we have a triadic color scheme. This is when you have a set of 3 colors that are equidistant from each other, and this always creates a triad of pleasing colors. So essentially, you have 3 colors on the color wheel chosen, each one equally spaced from the other. Now we're getting a bit more complicated. We have a split complementary color scheme. If you choose a color from one side of the wheel and find its complement directly across from it, but instead of using that complement, you use the colors on either side of it, then you'll have a split complementary color scheme. For example, here we have yellow as our main color. Then instead of choosing its direct opposite or complementary color, which is purple, we choose the 2 colors next to purple, blue purple and red purple or violet. Next, we have analogous. This one's pretty simple. An analogous color scheme is a set of 2 or 3 colors next to each other on the color wheel. They're just right next to each other. And finally, we have monochromatic color schemes. You've probably heard about this one as well. Sometimes when people see an analogous color scheme, which we just showed, they actually think that that is a monochromatic color scheme. However, a monochromatic color scheme is a color scheme of only one color, and you can also use its tints and its shades. So for example, here we have many different hues or colors, and then we have its tints and the shades. If we were to take any one of these columns, we would then have a monochromatic color scheme. So for example, we could take the yellow column and use any colors above or below the yellow. And as long as we stay within that column, we would have our monochromatic color scheme. Next up, now that we've talked about some of the basics of colors, I want to go into some tips for how you can use colors effectively in design. First off, be aware of your contrast. This is incredibly important, and this is one of the most common issues I see when students are first starting to work with color. If your colors are too similar in tone, It may be hard to see the details of the work. And especially if your design has text, the text is going to be really hard to read. So have some readability issues. These examples are from your textbook, and we can hardly read the example on the left. That purple and the blue are so similar in tone that we can't even read it. Whereas on the right, we have really good contrast between the orange, the blue, and this kind of light orange here. So it creates a very nicely contrasting color scheme, and this text is much easier to see. Next up, this is very important, keep your audience in mind. Now, we aren't starting projects yet, but you'll come to know that with each project you do, you are going to be defining your project audience. You will also decide on a color scheme, and your color scheme should be created with that audience in mind. Typically, bright colors are best for children's media, while more muted colors seem more mature and great for older audiences. Designs aimed at women typically have colors that are seen as more feminine, like pinks, purples, and pastel colors. They also tend to be a bit lighter, while designs aimed at men are often a bit darker and less saturated, and sometimes are even monochromatic with just black and gray being used. For example, here we have the left picture, which clearly is very bright, has a lot of different colors, and as we can see, it's probably aimed at children. Whereas on the right, we have a design that, even though the picture has some greens and blues in it, the design itself, the text, the shapes, they're all monochromatic. We're just using tints and shades of black. So we have black, white, and gray being used. So we can tell that these two designs would definitely be made for very different audiences. If you were trying to attract the audience of adult males, you probably wouldn't want to design something with the color scheme on the left. You also can get very specific with your color scheme depending on your audience. So if you're creating an icon set that's aimed at people who love the outdoors, perhaps you could use colors found in nature like browns and greens. And finally, my last tip is to really work on keeping your colors balanced. A design of all bright, saturated colors can be very overwhelming, and a design of all dull colors can be a bit boring. Also, if you use all cool colors like blues, you might have consistency, but a bright pop of a warm color like an orange or a yellow might be what you need to add some visual interest. Color honestly just takes time to master, so don't be afraid to experiment. It's just going to take time. And with that, I really wanted to give you guys some great resources for color inspiration. The first one, which is one of my personal favorite websites, is dribbble.com. And notice that it has 3 B's. So when you go to Dribbble, you might have to make an account to really get a full detailed look at the website, but even with a free account, you can get a pretty good look at what they have. It's really just a collection of designs from professional graphic designers. They have all sorts of designs. They have branding, illustration, print, product design, typography, web design. They have all sorts of categories that you can look at. And there are wonderful examples of design, color, and how to use color effectively in your designs. So really looking at other people's projects and looking at other people's work is a great way to get inspiration for your own projects. For example, maybe you see this and you like it. You can right-click, copy this image, and paste it right into whatever program you're using that week and sample the colors from this image if you would like to. You, of course, can add on to these colors that you see, but this is a great way to just get general design inspiration. And I'll probably talk about this project more in future weeks, or excuse me, this website in future weeks, because it is such a great resource. Next up, we have color.adobe.com. dribbble.com. This is a wonderful website. And this is what it looks like when you just type in that URL. It brings you to the Create tab of the website. And from there, we can see we have a color wheel. And on the left side of the color wheel, we have a whole bunch of color schemes or color harmonies. So right now it's on analogous, and we can see that all of these colors are next to each other on the color wheel. We could go to monochromatic, triadic, complementary, split complementary, so on and so forth. We even could get into some that we haven't even talked about in our class or in our textbook. But let's say, for example, we want a split complementary color scheme. You can click right there on split complementary, and you'll see that one of these circles has a little notch in it. That is your main color. And as you click and drag it around, let's say, for example, I know I want to use a lavender color. I can move this around to my chosen lavender color, and it will show me colors that will beautifully complement it based on the color harmony I've chosen. This is such a great resource, and it's one that I wish students used more just because of how effective it is, and honestly, how fun it is as well. You also can click the Save button, and it will save it right into your color library in your Adobe programs. This is a great resource. And finally, this website isn't one that I personally use very often, but a lot of students and other instructors love it. So I did want to include it. It's called designseeds.com, design-seeds.com. And you can see they really base it on pictures and sampling colors from those pictures. So for example, they have it based on different collections. They have it by different colors. Sorry, a little ad popped up. They have it from different colors. So let's say you know you want to use a peachy tone. You can click on it and it will bring up a whole bunch of different color schemes using this kind of peachy tone. So this is another great resource. Again, I don't use it as much, but it's one that I hear very highly thought after things. All right, and next up, I do want to talk about our due dates this week. So if you go into our course modules and you go to week 2, you'll notice that we have 2 due dates as usual, Wednesday and Saturday. Remember, this is a past course, so the due dates won't match up. But for week 2, on Wednesday, we have a reading quiz on chapters 6 and 7. Remember, this is an open book, an open note test, but you do have to do it on your own. You have 120 minutes. Don't exit out before you're finished. Stay on one tab, and then you'll have 2 hours to complete it. It's only 5 questions. Next up, we have our first reverse engineer post, our first of many, and it is on design and color. So you'll see it right under due date 2, that will be due Saturday. We have our design and color reverse engineer post. I'm not going to go too in depth with this, but essentially what you're going to do is you are going to choose an existing design from someone else, and you are going to analyze it using drawovers. Now, there are linked drawover instructions that will show you exactly how to do those drawovers. There also are videos that you can watch, which you should have already seen the blog setup videos if you're following the module correctly, but you should have your blog post set up, your blog set up, and then you can set up your blog post, which again, there's a linked video that will walk you through how to do that. And then first off, you need to find a design to critique. It has to be BYU Idaho appropriate, so that shouldn't include alcohol or drugs, no like scantily clothed people, all that fun stuff. It should have a good use of design principles and color, and it needs to include at least some text. You need to write an introduction to the blog post, talking about the original design, giving text attributing to the designer and a link to where the design was actually found. So for example, if I'm on Dribbble And I want to talk, well, I couldn't do that one because it doesn't have text. But let's say I want to do a reverse engineer post on, let's say on this. Pretty simple. I am going to have Keith Lowe as the designer, and I will use this link in my article to give him credit for it. And then you also can include any other relevant information about the designer, the design, or the general appeal. It should be an entire paragraph. So try and at least write, 4 sentences minimum. Next up, you will have paragraphs for each of these different principles used. So you will have a draw over and a paragraph for contrast, pointing out specific things about the contrast in the design. That can be color contrast, that can be value contrast, size contrast, whatever you want. If you need to, feel free to look back at the book to refresh yourself on these different principles you learned about. Same thing with repetition. We'll have a draw over and a paragraph for repetition, and alignment, and proximity, and color. So for color, you might want to talk about the color scheme they're using. You also could talk about if it's a warm color or a cool color, anything like that. And then finally, you'll write a final paragraph, which is your conclusion paragraph, essentially just discussing how the designer used all of those above principles to contribute to the overall design and look of their finished project. So that's an overview of the basic project. Next up, for the blog post requirements, please be sure that you follow all of these requirements. In fact, we'll talk about that a little more in depth. So again, you should follow the blog setup videos carefully, step by step. I also really want you to use the student examples that are linked in the announcement or weekly announcement to your advantage. Look at them, learn from them, get inspired by them. I highly recommend using headings to break up your article. So having a heading for the introduction, having a heading for the contrast, so on and so forth. And then before submitting, make sure you have met all of the blog post requirements. This is very important. So you need to have a title. You can read more about it under each of these bullet points. You need to have tags for the blog post. You need to have a blog post category, at least reverse engineer category, but you also can create others. If your theme allows for featured images, go ahead and select one, and make sure that your images are JPEGs or PNGs, so they should display correctly. And then also for the text, you should be typing your text into the actual text box of the blog. You shouldn't be typing it on a Word document and then taking a picture and then posting a picture of the paragraph. That really is not an effective way to create a blog post. And finally, my last tip for the reverse engineer post is to make sure you submit it correctly. I cannot emphasize this enough. You get a pretty significant amount of points just for submitting it correctly. You need to submit both a PDF of your blog post and a link to your blog post for the submission. And it talks all about that under the assignment. Again, there are student examples to use and reference and learn from. There are videos that can help you. Please use those to your advantage. Read through the rubric if you would like to. But other than that, that's what to expect from this week. As always, please feel welcome to email me or message me in Canvas with any questions you have, any clarification you need, any concerns. I am here to help, and I am really excited to see your first reverse engineer post.